Well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome the Chairman of the Environment Agency, Emma Howard-Boyd. I know this is a very pressing subject for so many members. Emma, I have to say, is exceptional at keeping in touch. We have a very good and constructive working relationship. You have faced major challenges. And I think in the theme of the last session, you know, working in partnership, trying to resolve things, big issues, which we'll come on to in questions with farming rules for water and how that plays out going forwards. But I'm delighted to welcome Emma up to here to speak to you. So please give a warm welcome for Emma Howard-Boyd.
Thank you, Minette, and it's incredibly humbling to speak today just after that talk from Theo, highlighting some of the major issues that we in the world are going to face. So I'm delighted to be here today. The last time I spoke at the NFU Conference was at the tail end of the wettest February on record. This February, 2 years later, the Met Office has named 3 major storms in 1 week for the first time. Storms not only bring flooding, but disruption to supply chains, power outages, damage to buildings, trees and hedgerows. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to be here now. I know that many of you will have repairs to make, as well as preparations for Storm Gladys, should she arrive with the same force as Dudley, Eunice and Franklin. I'd also like to thank Environment Agency colleagues on the ground working around the clock to help communities respond and recover, alongside those working for the emergency services, internal drainage boards and local authorities who have helped with the response. Events like these are becoming more frequent and severe. Last year, more than 76,000 incidents were reported to the Environment Agency's Incident Management Service, including flood, drought, fires, fish kills and pollution incidents. 1 every 7 minutes, 24 hours a day. The final session today is called Building Business Resilience, and everyone in society has a shared interest in doing that successfully. As chair of the Environment Agency, I have met farmers in drought making tough decisions about what vegetables to grow. I have met farmers in flood who've had to move livestock and repair damage to farm buildings and fields. The climate crisis means farmers could be doing both in the same year, perhaps more than once. The Environment Agency is calling for much stronger focus on adaptation nationally. Building your business resilience isn't only about avoiding risks. Farming is integral to a prosperous future. So whether it's recovering after there has been too much water, coping when there's not enough water, or managing soils for a healthy water system, we want to work with you to make the whole country more resilient. Minette asked me to set out how the Environment Agency wishes to work with farming as a constructive partner. And we want to work with you at every opportunity on environmental improvement, flood management, and net zero ambitions. For me, it starts with collaboration, clarity, and consistency. Leaving the EU gave the UK a chance to change laws and help farmers realise new opportunities. The much discussed concept of public money for public goods could unlock more productive agriculture, long-term food security, increased biodiversity, viable infrastructure, and thriving places. The Environment Agency has been advocating to ensure that farmers can be paid through the Environmental Land Management Scheme if the work they are doing upstream can mitigate downstream flooding. DEFRA have recently asked us to lead delivery for the first round of landscape recovery, restoring England's streams and rivers as part of the Environmental Land Management Scheme. These projects will restore water bodies, rivers and floodplains to a more natural state, reduce nutrient pollution, benefit aquatic species, reduce flood risk and increase resilience to climate change. This is an extension to our current role. It involves extending our legal, financial and delivery responsibilities and will secure additional future farming and countryside project funding. To enable the Environment Agency to adopt this new role, DEFRA will delegate specific powers to make and administer grants under the Agriculture Act 2020. But for farming to make the most of new opportunities, it will also need private investment as well as public money. We increasingly know about the multiple benefits of environmental services. The question is how to monetize them. Many farmers are interested in the prospect of being able to sell environmental services that come from improved soil health, be that carbon sequestration, nutrient runoff reduction, or greater water retention for flood resilience. Such markets could be catalytic to farming's future, but investors and farmers need greater certainty about the outcomes and the products on sale. This could come in the form of standards. We don't have a soil carbon code yet, and we would benefit from other standards for nutrient trading and natural flood management. The alternative is that green markets become like the Wild West, where farmers don't always draw first. Farming is the only profession where everything, all the responsibility for getting the multiple technical competing demands right, falls on the individual farmer's shoulders alone. There is no expectation, and critically, there are no legal duties on the agricultural industry to support farmers to make the best choices for themselves or the environment. And there is nothing or very little in the supply chain to require standards or proof for farmers' impact on the natural world. We think the wider agri-food supply chain has a role to assist and incentivize farmers for making environmental progress. Producer groups supplying to some retailers have made great strides in areas like animal welfare, but there is significant potential to do more for the natural world. The Green Finance Institute is also exploring the need for upfront financing and investment to support farmers switching to more regenerative methods. And the Environment Agency is working to help the private sector understand, invest in, and scale up activities that simultaneously deliver environmental improvements and generate an income. Get it right, and we can unlock investment into resilient food production and ensure that farmers are not ripped off by cowboys in city suits and welly boots. One project we are supporting with the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, DEFRA, and Triodos Bank UK is restoring peatlands in the Pennines. These are some of the most degraded in Europe. The Moors for the Future Partnership is working to restore and conserve peatland in the area and to attract investment that delivers sustainable financial returns. Restoring peatland creates benefits for private investors. It stores carbon and it filters water, meaning water companies use less chemical treatment. Peaty soils also have a huge role in reducing flood risk, and heavy rainfall and thunderstorms cause soil erosion, which makes flood risk worse. Some of England's most productive and high-value agricultural land is in the floodplain or in low-lying areas, many are below sea level. In 2020, we published the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy to 2100, which we worked on with the NFU. One measure in the strategy concerns the fens. It says we will work with farmers, land managers, water companies and internal drainage boards in the fens to better assess risks and discover what climate adaptation means in low-lying catchments where premium food production is dependent on flood risk management and land drainage. We also plan to engage major supermarkets and the food and drink sector in developing strategic options for sustainable food production in the fens. This approach will balance decisions which need to be taken now and those that need to be taken in the future. Similarly, with the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission in Devon, the Environment Agency is supporting the trial of a new approach to long-term land use decisions. This work has been part funded from a specific pot of money for innovative flood resilience. We are seeking out new ways to deliver a more strategic approach to land use decision-making at local authority, catchment and landscape levels. It will support action on net zero, nature recovery, ecosystem services, and also food production, housing and economic development. Increasing public interest in the use of rivers for recreational activities like kayaking or wild swimming is bringing more scrutiny to the connections between water quality, the ecological health of rivers, and human health. The public demand tough action. and we are delivering. In the current financial year, up to the end of January, the courts fined water companies £100 million and £123,000 for pollution incidents following our prosecutions. In November, the Environment Agency and Ofwat announced a criminal investigation into more than 2,200 sewage treatment works spanning all water and sewage companies in England. And I have called for the directors of companies guilty of repeated, deliberate or reckless breaches of environmental law to be given custodial sentences. There has been some fantastic campaigning and awareness raising about the impact of water company pollution, but attention is shifting to agriculture. Agriculture diffuse pollution is one of the biggest contributors to poor water quality in England. It is the primary cause for 40% of water bodies failing to achieve good ecological status. We need a long-term view on the best use of organic manures. Organic manures can benefit soil health, sequester carbon, and reduce the need for inorganic fertiliser. However, their excess use impacts rivers. As new laws are created by government, I want to deliver consistency and give you certainty about how we will enforce them. By focusing on the what, the standards we want to achieve, rather than a prescriptive how, we want to create space for you to innovate. But we must also be a robust regulator. When some farmers undermine environmental law, it delivers a triple threat. It damages the natural resources you need to grow food, it undercuts your economic model, and it diminishes British farming in the eyes of the public. That is why, for those who persistently break the rules, it is important we take action. And we do. But for those of you who want to do the right thing, the Environment Agency is on your side. If you need expertise or if you need pointing in the direction of good practice, the Environment Agency will help alleviate that extra demand on your time. The Environment Agency has worked hard to support the provision of money for slurry storage. We all know many current slurry stores are not fit for purpose and farmers risk prosecution. We hope that this presents a major opportunity for farmers to transform their storage, and do the right thing for water quality and avoid us having to prosecute, something we really don't want to have to do. The farming rules for water came into force in 2017-18. The government created these regulations and the Environment Agency must implement them. It was a significant change to business as usual, so we took an advice-led approach, working with hundreds of farmers across the country to help with the new circumstances. Last autumn, the Environment Agency introduced further flexibility by introducing a regulatory position statement that allowed over 4,000 farmers to spread organic material on the land last autumn, who otherwise would have not had the legal right to do so. The Environment Agency cannot offer such flexibility in perpetuity, so I'm pleased that the Secretary of State has asked Minister Prentice to create statutory guidance to remove any ambiguity about what is required this spring. Alongside that, we must improve our communications, being clear and consistent about what compliance means and when it must be achieved. We will work with the NFU, other farming bodies, Water UK and government to deliver clarity around the risk-based approach we will apply to autumn spreading this year. We also believe there are opportunities to streamline regulations governing farming and nutrient management and storage, which could make it easier for you to understand your obligations and for us as a regulator. Water resources are also an issue. We know that if the country continues to operate as usual, by 2050 we will need around 3,435 million extra litres of water per day. And some rivers could have between 50 and 80% less water during the summer. Although irrigation demands overall have gone down since the 1990s, spray irrigation demand is likely to increase in the longer term, with the biggest increases in eastern England. However, uncertainty exists related to food policies, diet trends, the proportion of food that gets wasted, and how efficiently water for irrigation will be used. I want the Environment Agency's regulation to deliver consistency so that farmers, water companies and other businesses can see a reasonable and fair approach to water use. Recently, emerging regional water resources plans have been launched for consultation that will start to show how the nation will manage water resources in the future. So please take part in the consultation. We want to hear from you. We see these plans not as the end of the story, but the beginning of how we act to ensure resilient and secure water supplies. In the 2 years since I last spoke at the NFU Conference, the pandemic highlighted the importance of British food production and international trade to keeping everyone fed with a balanced diet. By 2030, the population of the world will be over 8.5 billion people. There will be a likely 50% increase in global food production demand between 2010 and 2050. With strategy and a clear vision, that should be an opportunity for farming. Get it right, and it should leave a legacy of productive agriculture, long-term food security, increased biodiversity, viable infrastructure, and thriving places. The NFU's blueprint for British farming says we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make a success of the UK's new domestic agricultural policy and ensure that everyone recognises the importance and value of British food and the huge benefits farming contributes to the whole economy, the whole country, its economy and its treasured landscapes through our world-leading environmental and animal welfare standards. We agree, but to deliver that, we must also overcome climate impacts and natural decline. The Environment Agency and the farming sector have shared goals. We must work, learn and innovate together to achieve them. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. I've got a note on my iPad saying, Minette, if you close this session at 10:45, you'll already be 15 minutes late. Can you ask everyone to be back in the hall for 11:15? So we really need to get a crack on with questions. And can I call Phil Allen and David Watts to the microphone, because we don't have long. Emma, thank you for setting out your thoughts. I think it's a really key time to be having this conversation. Phil, are you ready? Or if not, we'll go with David Watts first.
Ready up here.
Well done. Thank you.
Hi, Paul Glanville, Devon NFU. The Environment Agency seems to regard slurry and farmyard manure as impossibly polluting, and it shouldn't be like this. Investment will deliver wins for climate, air and water, and farm profitability. So isn't it time that the agency argued strongly alongside the NFU that we need the time, the grants and the tax breaks to reinvest in modern safe storage and updated low ground pressure machinery?
Should we pick up both? David, if we take your question as well now, please.
Good morning. I'm a farmer in the White catchment, and as part of the area, I've received advice from Catchment Centres Farming, which it was launched in 2006. Since then, I've received a lot of advice and help on my farm and stepped to reduce phosphate levels. My neighbours have also benefited from CSF visits, some 681 farmers in total. Recently, Natural England Modern estimates that Catchment Centre Farming recommendations have reduced the catchment's phosphate loading by 8.5%. Therefore, will you commit to offering more advice in the future, backed by capital payments, to allow our businesses to improve environmental performances? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. If we pick up.
I'm really struggling to hear the detail of the questions.
So. It is, I don't know why, but it is, I thought it was my hearing, but it is difficult to pick it up. I mean, Phil is talking about, you know, that we need some time, and to a certain extent, I would say, the optimisation that I was talking about of the sector yesterday, really priming the SFI in order to get this right is absolutely essential. The investment in slurry storage. You know, I don't think there's a farmer in this room that doesn't want to have clean water, that doesn't want to have fantastic soil health, that doesn't want to do the right thing. But we are going to have to, I think, do this in a transitioning way. And if I take the regulatory position statement, because I think this is a sort of theme running through what David is saying as well, I think it was the timing of how it landed, and it was in complete conflict with the SFI. And I suppose, you know, when I was in Norfolk, and I referenced it yesterday, you know, surely the key time to spread, certainly in that part of the country, and this is another thing, every farm is different, every region is different, but spreading onto mulch in the early autumn is much better than spreading onto bare ground in February. Spreading digestate onto a standing crop has surely got to be the way forward. So making sure that the policy that DEFRA's thinking, because if that isn't right, it makes your job impossible, and it makes these guys' jobs completely impossible. So I guess it's just your thoughts on, you know, the investment that will be needed. We've got a lot of tenant farmers, a lot of lack of investment in slurry storage. You know, it's just getting the thoughts on that, and you know, priming the industry to make the changes that are needed and the investment.
And I think this is where we have seen through the work that we've been doing on the River Acts, and where our regulation has been very much advice-led and working with farmers to help them deliver investment. That is the approach that we want to continue to take. We have delivered the regulatory position statement. I think it was made very clear yesterday that we're working very closely now with DEFRA in terms of clarification. I think we've all heard some of the other questions that have been asked around timing and the backdrop that we're all facing from a cost of inputs, given the various crises that we are dealing with at the moment, whether it's what's taking place in Ukraine, the pandemic, the storms that we have been experiencing in recent days. That what I will take away and take back to my executive colleagues is what I've heard, and how we continue to work in a flexible, joined up, collaborative way.
Thank you, Emma. Could we have George Hosford and Richard Bramley to the microphone? If you stand really close to the microphone, hopefully that will help. George.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. George Hosford, County Chairman, Dorset. In the Poole Harbour catchment, the NFU, farmers and Wessex Water have worked up an innovative market-based approach to managing down nutrient pressure in this sensitive environment. What steps is the Environment Agency taking to facilitate and encourage this type of solution? And will it replace the agency's enthusiasm for enforcement and regulation, not just in Dorset, but elsewhere?
Richard.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear that okay? Great stuff. We have to pre-submit questions, which I did last week, and then events took course. And we have just been flooded for the third winter in a row on our crops, and you might remember visiting our farm in 2017. That wasn't because we just started to have a problem then, it's because we've had a problem for decades prior to that. And that problem is getting worse and worse and worse. You mentioned about the importance of our low-lying productive arable land. We've heard from the global view earlier the critical importance of food security and the challenges that we're going to face. So my question was to, essentially, are we going to start to see the investment that's needed to actually, rather than just talk about this, actually start to see these catchment issues addressed? Because it is really getting quite trying when you're trying to run a business, a small business, in a situation like we've got. Thank you.
So if we start off with the flooding-related question first, we have, in the last year, seen the Environment Agency's flood budget double to 5.2 billion, which is incredibly welcome. But I also like to put that in the context of a report that was published by the Infrastructure Projects Authority in September last year, which looks at all new infrastructure spend for the rest of this decade. £650 billion worth of expenditure. So I have been working with others on working on infrastructure across government to make sure that that infrastructure build-out is looked at through the lens of net zero, climate resilience, and nature's recovery. Because if you put the green budget, if you put our budget into that 650 billion, it is a thin green line of defence. Now that doesn't necessarily help you in your circumstances on your farm, in your catchment, but I think it puts into context what I've been trying to do as chair of the Environment Agency to make sure that the country's preparation for the climate shocks that we're seeing, be it flooding, be it drought, need to be seen in the context of all investment across the country, and also that we're thinking about maintenance of our flood infrastructure as well. So again, just this last few days, we'll have seen the many, many different banks and infrastructure and assets that we have protecting in place, protecting communities. And I think it is worth noting that whilst sadly 400 properties have been flooded, over 40,000 have been protected through the investment that has been made over the last decade. We still need to make sure that across all of our infrastructure assets in the country, that enough attention is being put into climate resilience. In terms of how we will work with catchments, and again, some of your question faded out, this is where we have been able, with our current flood programme, to bring in catchments in a different way, work more with farmers. And as I said in my speech, we're working alongside the policymakers of ELMS to make sure that where land is consistently or regularly being used to store water, that payments can be made to farmers. So we're moving as quickly as we can to develop our flood interventions in a way that supports individual farmers.
Because what we did see, Richard, when we visited your farm, and I, if you remember, came with you, Emma, was you were storing water on your crops for quite a long period of time that was causing enormous damage. And I think that's what many people will be feeling across the country, that we are not prioritising our food-producing land. We are storing water on it to protect urban areas. There is little recognition of that, next to none from government, and then we are facing a policy that is totally focused on taking land out of production, leaving Richard in a key food-producing area still at the mercy of ever more challenging weather events. And that seems fundamentally wrong and fundamentally flawed. And unless we can change the political thinking of that investment, Emma, I fear the situation will continue to get worse.
And this is where it's important for us to work together to make sure that those messages are aligned, because going back to the description I gave of total infrastructure spend, and that's new build, that's not about protecting existing infrastructure. We have to make sure that the whole of government, all of departments, are thinking about climate resilience in the way that we know is now needed.
And George Hosford's point on Pool, which has been about partnership working.
And again, that's one of the projects that was involved in the innovative finance work that the Environment Agency, DEFRA and others were piloting. I think this is where what's so great about projects like that is it's real stuff happening. And the next phase is how we learn from the real delivery that is taking place and work out how best to roll that out, but in a way that there are the right standards and codes against which proper investment can be made to really deliver on those services.
Yeah, absolutely. We're running very short of time. I'm reminded of Dame Glenys Stacey when she led that regulatory review for Michael Gove, and she felt very, very strongly, and she always used the analogy that it is pointless, a dairy farmer being able to pull down vast sums of money to plant a new coppice when they've got failing slurry storage. And she felt very strongly that any regulator, where there was a problem, they had to be able to enable the investment that was needed to get water quality back up onto its feet. And I just wonder what your thoughts are. I mean, the agency holds a lot of power. And where do you see, you know, that fine decision-making when you know there is a problem, the farmer knows there is a problem, and effectively, you know, they can access money to plant a new coppice, but they can't get their slurry storage investment. You know, surely that is wrong, and Dame Glenys had a very, very good point, and of course she is going to be chair of the Office of Environmental Protection. I really hope that we can work together to pivot the current agenda.
And that is where colleagues have been absolutely advocating for things like grants to enable the investment that we know is required. Because one thing that is very, very clear to me, and I talked about it in my speech in relation to the public desire for water quality to improve, we need to access those easier ways of making a change, and this is one that we should absolutely make sure is on the top of our agenda.
Absolutely. There are questions that we didn't get time for today. Would your office be happy to respond to the other questions that are here so we can go back to members?
We'd be delighted to do that. It's really important to hear directly from you that are out there farming our landscape, producing food, and I'd be very happy to reply to those questions.
And a lot rests on Farming Minister Victoria Prentice's shoulders, because I can absolutely tell you when the regulatory position statement landed in the autumn, I think as the office holder team, we probably had more calls on that and the shock and terror of what was happening, especially with ammonium nitrate, nitrogen fertiliser skyrocketing. So we've got to resolve it. We've got to make better use of our natural resources, and we've got to work better together. And if we don't have these conversations, we can't resolve it. So please show your appreciation for Emma Howard-Boyd coming today.